Right, we good to go.
Thank you very much, Andy. And yeah, just want to welcome everybody to another session of In the Air tonight. Chris Bradbury did a wonderful talk for us mid last year, summer, I'm guessing, of last year.
It was about this time, I think, last year.
Yeah, it was about this time, was it? Time flies, and it was a wonderful chat. But Chris has come back now with a little bit more of I think, a basic introduction now to camera drones, which
Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to myself as a recent purchaser of a very small camera drone. So looking forward to picking up a few tips. Please ask your questions away. If we will interrupt Chris if there's something poignant or just absolutely spot on to ask. If not, we'll leave them to the end. I know Chris is waiting for lots of questions towards the end. So Chris, without further ado, off you go, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, as the title suggests, getting started with camera drones. My name is Chris Bradbury. I'm the Drone Support Officer for the British Model Flying Association and the British Drone Flyers, which is the kind of new membership type for the BMFA. And I'm also director of an aerial filming company, which is Altitude Aerial Photography Limited. And primarily I do TV work with the occasional film and some surveying and a few other bits and pieces here and there in between. You'll probably see on the shelf behind me, there's a couple of very large M600 drones, which is what I mainly use. Tonight, I'm going to keep things very simple. Essentially, I've done a chat before, as Mark just highlighted there, where I went through laws, regulations, and all sorts of other bits. So I'm not going to delve into any of that tonight because there's other talks available that you can watch on the YouTube channel for that. There's talks on Article 16 that you can go back and view on the BMFA channel. So that's pretty much covered. So what I'm going to do is very, very quickly just talk through these three key points, which are the three key questions I get asked all the time, I suppose, as a day-to-day person. And that will hopefully give us a maximum amount of questions for the end. So first question is, probably the biggest question that I think a lot of people who are interested in getting into drones is, what drone should I buy? And the question, what drone should I buy, is actually the wrong question. What you should be doing is asking yourself, what data do you want to capture? What do you want to record? What information do you want to get? Then you want to think about how that data is probably going to be used, who's going to use it, where it's going to go, and then thinking about the drone itself, where do you want to fly it in terms of what environment? And then last thing on there is probably about the cost. So quite a few of us probably look at a drone first thinking, I want the cheapest drone because I don't want to spend too much. But that might not necessarily be the right thing to do. So when it comes to the data that you want to capture, the thing to think about is that a drone is essentially, or a camera drone in particular, is essentially just a flying sensor. You're putting something in the air to capture information. The information you want to capture could be various different types: photography, film, technical data, measuring, LiDAR, all sorts of bits and pieces. So the first question to ask is, what do you actually want to get from the drone? Why are you buying a camera drone? Why are you going to put it in the air in the first place? And when you think about that, the first thing you might want to do is photography. So when you're looking at drones in particular, you can start to look at the sort of information that's available from the manufacturers regarding the drones and the options that they come with. And when you're looking at a photograph, you might want to consider the highest resolution or megapixel count that you can get from the camera. More pixels, more information, more data. And likewise, you might want to look for facilities such as HDR, which stands for high dynamic range. HDR images is where the camera will stack three images together. It will do one underexposed, one standard exposure, one overexposed, and bring them all together so that you get a high dynamic range image, which is essentially what's in the background right now, the picture of Buckminster. A normal image, if you take it with just one, you'll get the background will be overexposed for the sunlight to get the building in focus, or the building will be dark to get the sky in focus. HDR lets you get more. Then you have options like RAW, if you want to capture pure data off the sensor, which you then have to edit later in Photoshop or Lightroom and other software such as that. And then compositing. So the shot here was taken with a DJI Mini 2, which a lot of people probably know. The DJI Mini is actually only a 12 megapixel camera, but what it can do in terms of compositing is it will take 9 pictures and stitch them together to make a 48 megapixel image. So that's what compositing is. And that's where you can get things like the globe shots and panoramics and wide angle and so on. So if you're looking at photography, think about the features that you want from that side of the camera. When you're looking at film, film is actually very different. 4K video is 8.8 megapixels per frame. So it doesn't matter how good, if you've got a 20 megapixel, 500 megapixel camera, if you're shooting 4K video, you're shooting 8.8 megapixels. So what you're probably more interested in with a film camera will be the bit depth, and bit depth 8 or 10 is the common numbers. That's how many colors essentially it can record per pixel. So every pixel can record red, green, or blue, and then it's to the 256 essentially colors available to the power of 8, which gives you a million odd colors. 10-bit gives you 4 billion, and then 12-bit gives you a trillion. It's kind of an exponential curve. You then get bit rate, which is a different type of bit. And bit rate is how much information it records per frame in terms of how much information can be edited and manipulated at a later date. So bit rate is something that's very important to what I do for a living. If you take television, for example, they won't accept footage below 100 bits per second, essentially, because they can't edit it, color grade it, or do much with it. Dynamic range does apply to photography, but with photography, as I mentioned, you can do the HDR stacking to get a dynamic range image. You can't stack HDR images in video, not easily anyway, that I know of. So you might want to look for a camera that's got more dynamic range. Then you've got at the bottom there, recording codec. So if you look at Netflix as a channel, for example, Netflix have an approved camera list. If your camera's not on that list, they won't accept programming from it where less than 80% of the footage has been taken with one of their approved cameras. So you can use an off-list camera for B-roll and some small shots, but not for much. So recording codecs, most people probably know H.264, MP4, and .mov. They're your standard sort of files. But you also get H.265, which is the newer ones that you get with GoPros and modern cameras. When you get into filming, you then get things like ProRes. So if you look at the latest Mavic 3 that's just been launched, one of the big features of that when you go for the Cine version is it can do ProRes, which means you're getting an Apple codec of colors. So when it goes through to editing, there's actually a benchmark color palette that they can use to do that color coding with. The image in the background here is Guy Pearce. Many of you probably recognize him as an A-list actor. I'm name dropping now. He did things like Iron Man 3. He was the bad guy in that. He was in Bloodshot and quite a lot of other films, as well as Priscilla, Queen of the Desert, which a lot of people probably forget. He's did a music video for us recently for Radiohead, so there's another big name drop. But when we were doing this, if you actually look at the drone that he's holding, it's a very tiny little Cinewhoop, which runs on one cell, runs for about 2.5 to 3 minutes. The video recording on this is 480p, so it's not even VHS quality from the old days. And on top of that, it's probably about 8-bit color or 6-bit. It's very low color quality, but it's what the band wanted. It's what the record label wanted. They wanted it to look nostalgic, like it was done 20 plus years ago. So rather than shooting the normal 16:9 widescreen, they actually wanted 4:3. So again, it's coming back to what do you want to use that drone for? Technical data, as I mentioned, we sometimes do surveying work with these drones, and you can see on the ground there in the picture. The key thing that you're probably looking for there is not necessarily what you're recording, but the accuracy of said data. So in terms of these drones, the reason we use some of these heavy lift ones is, yes, we can put a 100 megapixel camera on it, which is fantastic resolution, but we can also use it to link to other systems like RTK, which is real-time kinesthetic. Essentially, RTK is a ground-based GPS sensor that boosts the quality of your normal GPS sensor. So GPS on a drone is accurate to about 5 meters. GPS using RTK can be accurate to 5 centimeters. It's exponentially better. You then get things like LiDAR, which is where you're firing a laser out to scan a room, to get measurements, to make pixel clouds, to make 3-dimensional models. You then get thermal cameras. You can use isometric and radiometric. The difference between isometric and radiometric, thermal cameras, isometric just tells you what's hot and what's cold, and then you can measure against a set point. So you can set a benchmark from the temperature and it will tell you what's cold and what's hot. Radiometric, it will actually scan it, and then you can click on any area of the map and it will tell you exactly what temperature it is in Celsius or Fahrenheit. So when you've worked out what data it is you want to capture, whether you want to do filming, photography, or surveying, you've then got to work out how that data is going to be used. And the biggest question here is whether you're going to use it for your own personal amusement, or if you're going to try and make a living out of the drone and sell it on, because that's probably one of the biggest things that's going to impact where the footage goes. if it's personal data, it's likely that the requirement is just to use on the internet. So you're looking at things like taking holiday photos and whacking them on Facebook. You might be adding to TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, whatever Facebook or social media feeds you use. You might be a blogger or a vlogger that's got a YouTube channel, and you're just sort of adding to the content there. And the key thing with all of this is no matter what you're doing is you're setting the quality for yourself for what you want. So there isn't any requirement other than what you feel that you think is acceptable. So when you look at a lot of use that goes onto the internet, so anything you chuck on YouTube, for example, they will actually reprogram it into a totally different codec so that it can go around thousands of computers around the world and be watched by nearly anybody on anything from mobile phones to high-end computers. So whatever codec you recorded a film in, for example, they'll change it. So when it comes to personal use, you set what you want really, and if the quality is good enough for you, then it's fine. If you take a normal sort of laptop screen at 15 inches, a 4 megapixel image will fill that laptop screen very nicely. As I mentioned earlier, 4K is only 8.8 megapixels. So if you take the Mavic Mini 2 that can take 12 megapixel images, it's already better than a 4K image on your screen. So you're already going to get an image that can be blown up to a reasonable size and have a reasonable level of quality. When you're looking at using the drone for business use, it's going to be your client that actually specifies what data they want, and it's going to be buying equipment that suits what they need. So as I mentioned earlier with television and film, Netflix have an approved list of cameras. They have a set level of requirement for codecs that they want you to record in and film in. So if you can't supply that, you can't use the drone. So again, I'm going to pick on the Mini 2 a lot tonight just because it's very popular and I've got one myself, but you can't use it for television and film because it hasn't got the bit rate, it hasn't got the codecs they want. So it's very hard to use it. When you think about marketing materials, even with photography, the marketing material, that might be an image now that they want to blow up to 30 feet wide on a billboard, so you might need 30, 50 or 100 megapixel camera. Project development mapping, like I said, when we did Queen's Park Railway line there, the camera we were using was 100 megapixel pointing straight down. That gave us 1 millimeter of accuracy in terms of precision, plus 1 millimeter per pixel. So you could actually zoom into the three-dimensional model that was made and identify the labels on the wrappers of chewing gum. You wouldn't be able to read the small print and the ingredients, but you could tell if it was Wrigley's or whatever brand. So once you know what data you want to capture, where it's going to go, the next thing to decide is where you actually want to capture that data from. So in terms of what you want to photograph, that's going to determine where you're going to want to fly. So if you're a landscape photographer that's doing it as a hobby, you're likely going to be flying around the Lake District when you're up there. You're going to be in the middle of a farmer's field in the middle of nowhere, or Andy loves to take his out on the walks with his wife, and he goes and sends us these amazing photographs back from all the things that he's seen out in Yorkshire, God's country, in case anyone wonders. So in terms of what you want to fly and where you're going to fly, you then sort of have to think about, is it a countryside or are you now in a congested area? So if you want to do roof surveys and, as Mark was saying there, go and inspect your own drains, you need to think about the size of the drone and the restrictions that you need to separate yourself from the members of the public and the restrictions on the category. So we obviously have Article 16 as BMFA members in the British Drone Flyers, which is fantastic. It allows you to fly up to 25 kilo drones with a lot less restrictions than it would if you were to fly in the A3 open category, provided obviously you're a member of the association. But you also have the A1 and the A2 open categories. The A1 is where your DJI Mini will sit because it's under the 250 grams, so you get very few restrictions. But if you wanted to get a slightly better camera than the Mini 2, say the Mavic 2 or the Mavic 3, and get 20 megapixels, then straight away you're going to be over that 250 grams and you're going to be into the A3 category, unless you do an A2 qualification to bring yourself into using it in the A2 category. It's worth mentioning at this point as well, for those that don't realize, if you do buy a drone that sits in the A1 or A2 category, they're currently all classed as legacy aircraft. So as of the end of 2022, there's a lot of rumors that you won't be allowed to fly them anymore. You won't be allowed to do this with them because they're no longer A1 or A2, they're legacy aircraft, they're scrapped. What will happen is they will default to the A3 open category, or if you're a BMFA British Drone Flyer member, you can carry on flying it under Article 16, because both the A3 and Article 16 don't have legacy requirements. So don't panic if you're a BMFA member about the whole change of legacy. It's less of an issue. If you do want to do an A2 CFC, here's a little free plug for the UAV Academy, essentially. The BMFA and British Drone Flyers, we did negotiate a very good deal with them. So if you are a BMFA or BDF member, you can get the A2 at £49, which is actually reduced from their standard rate of £99. So that's a very good benefit to being a BMFA member or BDF, obviously. The last aspect then really of the drone is now you know what you want to capture, how you want to capture it, who's going to get the information, and how much you'll want, you need to think about how much that drone is going to cost you. So as I said earlier, the Mavic Mini 2, fantastic drone. They're a good price at £550 for a combo, but it doesn't matter how good a drone is. If you can't capture the data you want, it's going to be the wrong one for what you need. So rather than coming back to what I said at the beginning there, when I get people say to me all the time, what's the best drone? It depends what you want to do with it. So for me, all the small drones, we tend to use them for indoor shots when we've got very restricted space. And it's these big heavy things that we fly around London because we've got redundancy. We've got the cameras that work for Netflix. We've got all of that bits and pieces. And I think there's two things that I always think there. Expensive isn't always best. So just because you've got the most expensive drone doesn't mean it's best for what you need. And at the same time, cheap isn't always a saving. You're not always saving money by buying the cheapest. Buy cheap, you might sometimes buy twice. It is also worth mentioning, so another little BMFA plug. If you are a BMFA or BDF member, you can apply for a Vectis card and you can get 7.5% off at the moment by buying the vouchers for Currys, 6.5% off if you want to go through Argos. So something like the DJI Mini 2, which is a £549 retail, I think, in Currys for their combo deal. You can get 7.5% off that, which is just over £41, which is more than the cost of the BMFA membership and the reward card. So straight away, you've saved your entire annual subscription back. What do you need to get started? So you've now bought a drone, you've decided what you want. The first thing, obviously, is the legal side of things. You need to make sure you've got your operator ID. It does apply to every camera drone, regardless of the 250 gram weight limit. That's another common one that I see on a lot of the forums, people saying you don't need to register it because it's under 250 grams. You do. Because it has a camera that's capable of recording data, it has to be registered with the CAA. The flyer ID, I believe A1 is optional. However, I would urge everybody to do the RCC, especially if you're a BMFA member, because the data that the test that you take for the RCC is a lot more relevant to flying as a model flyer as opposed to flying just commercially in the middle of nowhere. The flyer ID, it's worth mentioning, if you do want to do the A2 CFC with UAV Academy, the A2 has to be linked to a CAA flyer ID. It can't be at this time linked to the RCC ID. So if you do want to go onto the A2, just go and do the multiple choice. It's free. It's not going to cost you anything. Probably takes 10 minutes. The online questions, you can take them as many times as you like for the online IDs. The next thing you really need to think about is insurance. If you're flying as a hobbyist, it's not a legal requirement to have insurance, but it is obviously extremely highly recommended. If you are a BMFA or BDF member, then obviously you get our class leading insurance as part of your package, but it's worth noting it doesn't cover commercial use. It is only for hobby flying. So if you do want to go and take your drone and turn it into a business of some form, you're going to have to get some insurance that complies with EC 785/2004, which is referenced in CAP 722 by the CAA. It's their guidance document, obviously, for flying drones. The last thing you'll probably need for your drone to make sure it works is a smart device. I was actually chatting to somebody today who's just been given a DJI, sorry, not a DJI, a Apple Mini, one of the old small laptops, small iPads, and he was hoping it would work with his DJI Mini 2, but because it's the original Apple Mini iPad, it's only able to go up to iOS 9, and you need iOS 11 or above to run the Fly app with DJI. So unfortunately, that's something to consider is, will the device you've got work? I have met quite a few people, sadly, that have gone and bought a drone without looking at all the specs and then had to buy a new mobile phone or some form of cheap tablet to work with it. This is because you need to run an app, and you have various different apps that you need to use. In the background of this image is the Ground Station Pro app that we use for mapping. That's actually a DJI app. It lets the drone follow waypoints in the mission. There are other apps you can get, which are third parties, such as Litchi, for example, LITCHI. That's a very good app. Just be aware with third party apps, they don't necessarily always work perfectly. So just make sure that you know what you're doing before you get into it. If you take Litchi as an example, the DJI Mini doesn't have a follow me mode and it can't do waypoints, but the Litchi app will work with the DJI Mini version 1 and it will let you do waypoints. I believe they're working on updating it for the Mini 2 at some point, so that'd be very, very useful for people. In terms of optional extras, there's a small kit bag that I take out wherever I go. You can see it in the background there. Lens filters, you might want a neutral density or an ND filter. Really good for filming if you want to basically put some sunglasses on the lens and darken the image so that it's not overexposed if you're trying to get the right frame rate. Polarizing filters help get rid of reflection on water and shiny surfaces. So if you're trying to film a lake, for example, that's got that really nice glass finish on a sunny day, polarizing filter is brilliant. As you can see from the image, I've got a nice hard case there for my drone. But if you're going to take the drone out and about with you, consider buying some form of bag or case to transport it around with. The hard case is brilliant if you're someone like me that takes drones out for work and it gets chucked around by members of staff in the back of a transit van. They're not the neatest and tidiest of people with my equipment sometimes. I like to hand launch. It's fairly easy to hand launch a drone if you've learned the technique, but bear in mind, some of these smaller drones, the propellers sit very close to the ground. So if you're trying to take off in a field, for example, you'll get grass tangled up in the props. So you can get fold up, pop out, take off mats that you can take around and put down. If you've got something like the hard case in the background of the photograph, you can use the lid of the case. So a takeoff mat or something to put the drone on. Spare batteries, no point going out with just one battery, especially if you're out for a long walk. You might want more than one flight. And then you might want to consider in some form of multi-charger. The Mini 2 with the combo deal is great because obviously you get a few batteries and you get the charging hub with it. So that's all good. Memory cards. Biggest mistake I see people doing with memory cards is buying, again, too cheap. So there are memory cards out there that you can buy for as little as £3 or £4 on Amazon, but they don't have the data transfer rates that you require for 4K video or large images. So it's not too bad with photography because the drone will buffer the image and then slowly load it onto the card. But if you want to do video, it's trying to do 25, 50 photos a second, and it will do 2 or 3 seconds, then just go, yeah, had enough, stop. And then, your recording's ruined. SanDisk are my personal brand of choice when it comes to memory cards. And a reasonably priced 64 gigabyte micro SD is only about 17, 18 pounds. So it's not a bank breaker at all. One thing I would say with memory cards, this is from experience, I prefer multiple smaller cards than one big massive card. It's very easy to go out and buy a 256 gig memory card that you can sit there and fill up for hours upon end. But if that gets corrupted, that's the whole thing gone. So I tend to use 3 or 4 64 gigabyte cards. And when one card gets filled, I swap it out. That way, if I crash or corrupt a card, I've only corrupted that one section of my flying, not all of it. Last thing there is spare parts. I'm not going to say go out and service your drone in the field. Definitely don't service out in the field or do maintenance in the field. But small things like replacing a propeller, you might land, get tangled up in the grass, and like I say, damage the propeller. You might do your pre-flight or post-flight checks and notice there's a screw missing. So having a few spare screws and simple parts that you can fix on the go with is worth doing. So in that photograph there, you can see there's 3 batteries, and at the top, there's some little plastic packets. That's the spare propellers for the DJI Mini just in the box with me when I go out. The last thing you probably need is somewhere safe to practice and test. The reason I've said practice and test, we all need to practice and learn to fly. But when you do anything with a drone, so if it's a brand new drone, don't make its first flight overflying houses and inspecting a guttering or going out to film over a monument somewhere. Go somewhere quiet to do that very first flight, because that's probably when it's going to have a problem, if it's going to have a problem, is that first flight. So if you've done a firmware update or anything like that, go to your quiet, safe place, have a test flight there. If you've done a serious service or maintenance on the drone, take it to your quiet test place, test it there before you go out and fly it in anger. And the last thing I'd say there is, and I see this an awful lot in the forums, people saying, where's the best place to learn? Just fly in your garden. You're probably going to upset your neighbours if you're not too careful, if you're out there practicing all the time. But again, it comes back to what I was just saying about having somewhere safe to fly. If you get it wrong, do you really want to dump it through the roof of your neighbour's conservatory? Just think safety-wise. My garden's full of trees, so I very rarely fly in my garden. Brings you on to learning in general. So how can I learn? Use us, use the BMFA and the BDF to start with. We've got a great network of over 800 clubs around the UK. You can go onto the BMFA Club Finder through the Just Go portal. You can search, if you're not a member of a club already, you can search for a club that does multi-rotors from the drop-down discipline, enter your postcode and find somewhere safe to fly, or just go and find a nice, safe environment, because Article 16 does allow you to fly in recreational areas like parks, provided there isn't any bylaws preventing it and you've done a risk assessment. We also do training events as part of the BMFA. So I'm chairman of the Achievement Scheme Review Committee for the BMFA, as another baseball cap as I wear, if you like. And we do an event most months up at the Buckminster site, 2 days, Tuesday, Wednesday, with one long weekend in August, where you can come up and be taught to fly. So again, the image in the background here is Andy and I running the first of the drone events that we did last year. And we've got half a dozen people there that have come up to experience and have that first introduction to camera drones in a safe environment. There was a couple of drones there that were flown for the very first time as well. So we helped, show them how to set those aircraft up. The other thing that we do is the BMFA. So here's another shameless plug for some of the activity that we have going. Obviously, we have In the Air Tonight. You're here tonight to take part in one of those. This is a great place to learn information. But we also have the British Drone Flyers group on Facebook. So you're welcome to join if you're a BMFA or BDF member. That's a great place to chat to other drone interested members, but also a great place to post questions, because both myself and Andy are admin on that forum. So when you get an answer through that forum, it's probably going to be a safer and more reliable answer than the guy on Facebook going, "It'll be fine, send it." Yeah, that's the phrase we love, send it. We also do the Wobbly Gimbal, which is our virtual pub. So once a month, we just basically have a Zoom session a bit like this, but it's a chance to have an interactive chat rather than the In the Air Tonight is more of a presentation and then questions. It's more of an open mic. Everybody can chat. And we normally aim for these to be about 45 minutes to an hour, but it seems to end up at around 2.5 hours each time, because we just get chatting away and question after question comes out. So Wobbly Gimbal is definitely worth a visit if you're interested in drones. The tech side of things is probably the most important thing to learn, rather than the physical flying of a drone. When you consider a model aircraft, a lot of people have always gone to the Model Flying Club to learn to fly, because the moment you take off with an aeroplane, it's doing 30, 40, 50, 60 miles per hour and heading off into the horizon at a high speed. With a drone, you press a button on the dashboard of the app and it takes off and it sits there holding GPS at 2 meters of altitude in front of you. And for most of the DJI drones in particular, if you do nothing else, it will then land itself before the battery runs out. So it's very, very hard to actually crash a DJI drone. You have to try in many respects. So rather than worrying too much about the flying, it's probably actually more important to learn about the tech itself. So learning the app, learning how to do things like compass calibrations, how to make sure the IMU is okay. The IMU is the inertial measurement unit. Normally, you don't have to do anything with these, but if the drone is doing anything a little bit quirky, the app might actually come up and say to you, please do an IMU calibration. And then it'll start to say to you on the screen of the app, this is what I want you to do. When it's done, it will basically tell you if it succeeded or failed. So understanding the drone's app and actually having a good look around it is probably more important in some respects than learning to fly the drone itself. When you're learning to fly the physical drone, my best advice to you is to maintain line of sight, obviously the legal requirement. But if it's starting to feel like you don't know which way it's going or it's out of control, just let go of the controls, because most of these modern smart drones will just stop in the air where they are using the GPS and sit and hover. That then gives your brain a chance to think about what it's doing, which way it was facing, what you need to do next. And even then, if you still can't work it out, to bring it back safely, press and hold the return to home button and watch it come back and land where it took off from. Yeah. Just bear in mind, if you took off from a boat, the boat's move, the landing point is now back in the river, further down the where you started from. In terms of learning the apps and learning the camera features in general on any of these drones, the manufacturers mostly do good tutorials. If not, there are hundreds of people on YouTube doing tutorials for various different things like the boomerang modes and the selfie modes that you get on a lot of these drones. So always have a good look on YouTube. I'd recommend watching 2 or 3 just to make sure you get familiar with it, because you might find somebody on there's got no clue and is just trying to blag their way through getting people to like their YouTube channel. So that's pretty much an introduction to camera drones, really, in a nutshell. I said it'd be nice and short and sweet. So I think we can sort of open it up to questions really on what people want to learn.
Oh, fantastic, Chris. Fantastic, Chris. Thank you very much. Really, really good. Couple of questions to start off with. I was going to interject, but you were going at such a pace, and it was so interesting. I'm afraid I just had to listen rather than interrupt. So, David Gallier, would you recommend an all-in-one or drone that can carry a DSLR?
That comes back to that first question, really, about what's the right drone. It's what do you want to do with it. So an all-in-one, things like the Mavics, the Minis, all of these kind of drones, the Parrot and Affis, they're fantastic. If I was buying one for myself as a hobbyist, I'd probably just go with the Mini 2. But because I'm a photographer, I might up myself to the Mavic 2 or 3. So it's an all-in-one. It's got a great camera on it, and it can go out and do what I want it to do. Being that I do photography for a living, and obviously with the drones as well, and we get people that want very high-end stuff, then I might want to put a 30 megapixel SLR. So this one is actually set up with a Canon C70 movie camera, and this one is actually set up with a Canon 5D Mark IV photography camera. We can interchange, obviously, and swap around. We've got about 30 or 40 different cameras, from GH5s, GoPros, all the way up to C300 Mark III cinema cameras. So to answer that question, it comes back to that first question. What do you want to get from the drone? If it's portability, taking it on holiday, and probably taking photographs of nice areas without being a nuisance, then the small all-in-one is best. A drone that can lift an SLR is probably going to be, to lift a couple of kilos, you're looking at a 900 millimeter hexacopter or something of around 7 or 8 kilos in weight. So you then got noise, you're going to interrupt in the area. So again, coming back to the kind of photos Andy takes a lot when he's out on his walk, you're not going to carry a huge drone in the first place because it's too heavy and not portable. And secondly, you're going to annoy everybody else that's trying to enjoy that landmark.
Brilliant. Thank you. Lenny Allen, is it worth doing the A1 and A2 course if I intend to use the drone as recreational only? I think you answered this, but I'll let you flesh it out a bit more.
I think clarify it. We did have one of the competitive organisations did a YouTube video stating that you don't need the A2 CFC because you can just fly Article 16. The thing with the A2 CFC, the A2 does not distinguish between hobby or commercial. It's not about you need the A2 to be commercially flying. The A2 qualification simply lets you fly in the A2 open category with an up to 2 kilo drone. So if the questions there is if you want to fly a Mavic, the standard size Mavic, which is around, I think the Mavic was 750 grams, the Mavic 2 is around 950 grams, and I haven't looked at the Mavic 3 yet, but you're around the kilo mark. You need to be in that A2 category, or you're going to have to be away from congested areas. So the A2 is worth doing because you'll get the best of both worlds. You get Article 16 when you're not in a congested area and you're just trying to do something leisurely, but you'll also get the ability then to go into a congested area under the A2. But again, it comes back to what do you want to use the drone for and where do you want to photograph. But yeah, definitely worth doing if you want to fly in those categories, in my opinion.
Chris, a question here, which I was actually going to ask, but Richard Doherty is asking the very, very similar question. Being a free flighter, you see, what type of camera drone would be most suitable to search for an RC plane lost somewhere in a crop field? I mean, we lose free flight models all the time, and actually it's something that we thought about doing a number of times.
I know Andy's done this recently, and I've done it over the years quite a few times as well. When I used to do it, when I started filming with drones years back, we're talking 7-8 years ago, one of the first commercial rigs I had was a 550 millimeter hexacopter that could carry a GoPro and a gimbal. Basically, the answer to this question is any drone that can sit and hold a GPS position and has a camera that you can look up and down with. So if you've got a camera if you take the Mini, the Mavic, all of these kind of off-the-shelf drones, the Parrot and Affi, nearly all of them have a camera that can be tilted up and down. You can have the camera up to look where you're going as you fly out to make sure you're in the rough area. Then you can tilt the camera down to look straight down. And then when you find the aircraft, you can then put the aircraft in a GPS hole directly above it. And then anybody trying to find it in the field can walk straight to it because they can see the landmark above them. I did one at Basingstoke Model Aero Club years back. I'd had a phone call. They'd had a 2-meter wingspan, one of these large FMS 1.7 meter wingspan Mustangs, silver and yellow one that had gone into the rapeseed field. So 6 to 8 feet high, yellow bushes, yellow plane. You can see where this is going, can't you? It's just virtually invisible. They'd been looking for it for about 4 hours. I turned up with my Inspire 1, I think I was using at the time, took off, went roughly in the direction they said it had crashed, found the dent in the field where there's a mark in the crops that doesn't look right, looked down with the camera, there it is, put it in a GPS hold. That took me 2.5 minutes. It then took them 3.5 to 4 minutes to walk to it. And when you look down, you could actually see they'd walked past it within 3 feet originally when they were searching for it. So any drone that can hold a GPS position and look up and down with a camera.
I found one at Buckminster, went into the crop field across from the runway. They'd spent 20 minutes looking for it in the complete wrong part of the field. I found it with the Mini 2 in, well, 2 or 3 minutes, really. So anything really will work, won't it?
Yeah. I did I'll find a link for it and chuck it in the channel. There's one of my YouTube videos was me finding a drone, years back. Yeah.
We'll have to give it a try sometime. John Billington Cox, what does Article 16 mean for me as a BMFA member flying an Inspire 1 without an A2 C of C? Thanks, John.
So the key difference with the Article 16 compared to the open categories, the Article 16 allows up to 25 kilos. So if you take an Inspire 1, they're 3.5 kilos at the maximum takeoff mass. So because of the legacy limit of 2 kilos, you can't fly the Inspire in the A2 category. It's too heavy. The A2 category does say 4 kilos, but that's only for C2 class drones, which don't exist yet. So the Inspire is too heavy for the A2. But it does mean you can fly in Article 16 because that goes all the way up to 25 kilos. So all you have to think about is what are the limits of flying the Inspire or flying under Article 16, I should say. So if you take the A2, you can fly within 50 meters horizontally of people, your property that you're not involved with, essentially. Article 16 is still the same. I think it's 30 meters, actually, isn't it? And then 15 meters at takeoff. So you get a slight reduction on that in the first place. The only kind of big difference is that the A2 will let you go into a congested area. The Article 16 does say to not fly in a congested area unless it's set aside for recreational use and you can do a risk assessment and so forth. So that's the key thing. But just look at the Article 16 limits and fly within that.
Thank you. Robert Stanford, are autonomous flight modes allowed in Litchi?
Depends on the drone. I'm not sure of the question there. Are they allowed legally or are they?
I'm guessing it's legally because you're not in control of the drone itself, I'm guessing.
Yeah, so when it comes to automated flights, I qualified this one with the CAA myself a couple of years ago, just as the regulations were coming up to change, because one of the things I do is I'm flight safety officer for a university challenge event where we do automated drones. The classification that came back is the remote pilot is the person who's either directly in control of the drone or initiates a autonomous flight and can override it at any point. So when we're flying autonomous here, we fly in what's called the certified category or the specific category because we've got an operational authorization. If you're flying in the open categories, provided you can override the flight at any time, stop the drone and manually fly it back, you are flying the drone. You might not be physically controlling it, but you're the one giving it the commands. So it's legal.
I guess you
can override it.
Yeah, I guess the fear is with autonomous flight that you can set waypoints many miles in advance and they can disappear out of sight. And of course, out of sight is the issue, isn't it then?
Well, you're even with the automated flights, you're still governed by the visual line of sight law. You're still governed by the 500-meter radius and stuff like that. You still can't chuck it away. If you want to fly beyond visual line of sight, then you need to do a GVC or a general visual line of sight certificate course with a RAE to get an operational authorization. And then on top of that, you would have to do the extended visual line of sight or the BVO, beyond visual line of sight extension on top of that. So yeah, just stay within line of sight. But if you want to do a waypoint mission, so there's someone who came to one of the recent events at Buckminster. They've been flying a Mavic 2 and they've been photographing canals. And they just want to take a photograph from the same position every couple of weeks to show how the development's going. So they're using Litchi to do that. It's perfectly legal, provided you can override and land the drone at any point.
Brilliant, thank you. Chris Barlow asks, what are the alternative companies to DJI for a small to medium-sized camera drone?
To be honest, DJI have become like Apple. You know, they've kind of swamped the market and taken over a massive share. But there is the Parrot and Affy. They're very, very good. The Parrot drones in general are very good. And I'm trying to remember the name of another one, which looks like a DJI Mavic, but it's not. But they're doing... Second?
Is it Autel?
Autel, thank you. Yes, the Autel drones. The Autel's very good, the 6K one. Yeah, so there are other brands out there. Just DJI seem to have done very good marketing and swallowed up a massive, I think it's about 75% market share they've got in the UK, something ridiculous like that. There are benefits to DJI in that if you have an issue, that DJI's customer service is not the best, but then there are so many people that sell DJI in the UK, that makes life a lot easier, if that makes sense. But yeah, there are other brands.
Just spotted a comment in the chat box. Just to remind everybody, if you could try and put them in the question, and we can definitely get them then. But it's part of the same subject. We're talking about Roger Lanigan. What do you think of the Uniques?
Uniques, yeah, nothing wrong with those. You've got the Typhoon, isn't it? The hexacopter. I've had a few of the Uniques come through. When I was a commercial examiner, I had a few of them come through. They seem fine. Nothing problem with them. There's a lot of the ones I would say to try and avoid in some respects is the clone drones. So you go on Amazon, for example, and search 4K drone, you'll find something that looks incredibly like a Mavic and it costs £55. And you have to sit there and think, well, if I'm getting a transmitter back, just think of the cost of a free cell 2800 milliamp hour LiPo at about £20-25 for a decent battery. So if you're getting a £30 battery and a drone and a transmitter, you're really not getting quality. You are getting what you pay for. I did a job recently where we went down. It's a place where they basically do a drone academy where they get to fly drones on board a cruise ship. They all get to come and have a go. They originally started with the Parrot small drones and they were fine, but eventually they all got broken. So they replaced them all with a cheap aftermarket one off Amazon, which lasted 2 weeks. And then I went down there to find a suitable replacement. So comes back to that thing earlier, buy cheap, buy twice, quite often.
Brilliant. It's interesting because Roger's just said they're roofers, and I did using my Mini 2 was actually for a roof inspection of my own house because I'd got a little bit of a leak behind a chimney. So there you go. So there is use. Mike Alton, I've just found out how ignorant I am about the theory side of filming. How long does it take to get a grounding or even an understanding?
It depends. I would say if you want just a basic guide just to get nice footage every time you go out, you can sort of learn some basic settings and then you've only got to adjust one or two little things here and there. But to actually learn film, I mean, university students go there for 3 or 4 years to get a degree, and even then they're not fully experienced. I've been doing photography. I was given my first camera at the age of 3. And I think my parents gave me my first roll of film at the age of 7. So I was walking around for 4 years just going click, click. So yeah, learning film, learning photography in general. There are some great, again, YouTube tutorials and videos. I would always suggest if you want to look up how to take a photograph of something, go back to one of those questions I said, what do you want to take a picture of? And then Google or YouTube that particular thing. So right now, if I was going to go out and take astrophotography of the stars, I would ask on YouTube, best settings for night photography, best settings for that photography, and kind of get a baseline setting, as it were.
Thanks, Chris. Robert Stanford, would you like to say something about FPV Cine Whoops?
Yeah, for sure. It's another form of drone. So again, coming back to that first thing earlier about, what's the best drone? What do you want to do with it? So if I drop out of sharing a screen, because then people will be able to see my screen, won't they? There we go. So this is Grace. It got named after the daughter of the person who owns XL Music, essentially, which is the record label for Radiohead. So we used this one to film an entire music video. It was modified so that we could move the camera forwards just to get the frame out of shots. But that is a mini one. This is your standard Cine Whoop. And the benefits of a Cine Whoop is you can do much more smooth, fluid, flowing flying because you're flying in a manual mode rather than fighting GPS or any computer stabilized systems. So if you take something like a Mavic, again, the Mini, like I said, I'm going to pick on these all night. As soon as you move the stick, it wants to stop. You know, it wants to stop itself. This won't. If you let go of the stick, it will just carry on drifting the direction you left it. The reason we call them cine whoops, the whoop comes back to the original whoops that were these tiny little things here that we're racing, and it's from the ducks, and that's basically a tiny whoop. So a cine whoop, as you can see, it's a bigger version. It's got ducts around the propellers. And the benefit is we can carry GoPros. The GoPro that's on the front of here, I don't know if you can quite see it in this light, it's what we call a naked GoPro. It doesn't wear a bikini. It's basically, we've taken the sensor and the lens and then dumped everything else. So the battery's been removed, the control board's been removed, the back screen's been removed, and a lot of stuff's gone. The firmware is then flashed so that if I want to program and change the settings on this, I can create a load of QR codes on my phone, hold the QR code in front of the camera, and the camera will then recognize it and change the settings to 4K, 60 frames a second, base setting of ISO, whatever I want it at, for example. But the benefit of these compared to, say, a normal racing drone for filming, if I hit somebody with a racing drone, propellers stick out. These have guards. You can bump into people and you're not going to shred them. You can also bump into the building that you're flying around in. So something that we might have done with this, for example, is a fly through, where you go through a building, over obstacles and down stuff, and you don't want to risk scratching anything or hitting anything. But that's the cine whoop.
Thank you. Brilliant. Tim Kersley, are there any amateur drones offering zoomable lenses?
Zoomable lenses. So zoomable lenses, the Mavic 2 Pro Enterprise, I believe, has a zoom. Well, they do the Mavic 2 Pro, and then they do the Mavic 2 Zoom. The Mavic 2 Pro is a 20 megapixel, half-inch sensor, I think, or 1/2. The Mavic Zoom has a slightly smaller sensor, but it can then zoom. But it's a lot of them are digital zoom. So even when you look at the Mavic 3 that's just come out, they've got a standard micro 4/3 20 megapixel camera, and then there's another camera above, which is a zoom one. It can do 7 times zoom, but when you actually look at the images, it's just mushed in and crap quality. So my advice when it comes to zooming with a drone is fly closer.
Kevin Smith asks, as a former RC model flyer, my first drone experience, Mavic Air 2, was very disappointing as it was so easy to fly. However, when I got more familiar with the flying side, the photo video really opened up a new world for me. I can now get to places that previously were completely inaccessible to me and as a wheelchair user. Well, that's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah. I would say when it comes to flying drones, you know, when you buy things like an FPV drone, you buy it to fly it for the fun of flying it, and the camera is kind of secondary, unless you're someone like me that goes out and films with FPV drones. The camera drone, yeah, it's a bit boring sometimes, you know, it just sort of, you take off and it sits there, but it's like he says, it's what you can shoot with it, what you can film with it, and where you can take it is the amazing thing with them.
But I guess the clue is in the, you know, the title. It's a camera drone. It is for taking photographs or filming. You know, it's not necessarily for whizzing around through, you know, racing or anything like that. So,
no.
Eb Swarbrick, are these A1 and A2 tests online, day course or residential?
Okay, so the A1 doesn't actually have a test as such. I believe with the A2 CFC, it will extend the A1 eventually when the C-class drone's out, but I don't think it makes any difference to the A1 at the moment having the A2. I'd have to double check that. What the A2 is an online test. So if you go for a UAV Academy, for example, if you do the one that's the affordable, you know, discounted one from us, when you go through there, you sign up for the course, they give you a password, you register and you log in, you go through a load of tutorials, which will consist of watching a YouTube video and then having like a little kind of session at the end of each video. Once you watched half a dozen videos, you'll get to a test stage. The test, unlike the RCC test or the Flyer ID test from the CAA, the downside of those tests, what's to stop one person doing it for the 20 people in their club, you know, and just being dishonest, as it were. With the A2, it is done under exam conditions. You'll either need to go to, for some of the training sites or training companies, they want you to go to a test center, sit in an exam condition room, it's all sorts. The benefit of the UAV Academy one is when you do the test, You actually just sit there on a laptop like we are now with the camera on. You turn the camera around the room, turn the laptop to show that there's nobody sat in the room and you haven't got all the answers written on a whiteboard, behind the screen. And then you sit there and you do the test, and the laptop will monitor your camera and microphone so that you haven't got somebody walked into the room giving you all the answers, at which point at the end, you've been invigilated essentially and you've done the test. If you are a kind of a process, like a PowerPoint type person, you can normally do it in a day, to be honest, the A2 CFC. The test itself, I think, is around 55, 60 questions with a minimum pass rate. So it's very similar to doing the RCC. It just covers more topics, covers more detail.
The last question we have on the list at the moment, John Leach, can you advise on firmware update? I'm not quite sure specifically what that's for,
well, firmware updates, nearly all drones have them. I've literally just done one for the DJI Mini 2 today, actually, because I plugged it in to take a screenshot for this chat and then realized it was out of date. So when it comes to drones, the CIA advice is to keep your drone up to date so that it's got the latest firmware. And the reason for that is so that it performs as the manufacturer essentially intended. A lot of firmware updates get rid of bugs and get rid of errors. The firmware update process is a lot better now than it was 10 years ago. When the Inspire 2, for example, very first came out, the first firmware update that DJI launched crashed over 100 Inspire 2s around the world because part of the update process hadn't finished essentially every time you updated it. And when you went out to fly, it started the update process again. And part of that update is a power cycle. So you took off, got up into the air at 5 meters, and the drone locked you out, sat there, and then switched off and fell out the sky. When it comes to the commercial, so you have prosumer, I think is the new term that's coming in for things like the Minis, the Mavics, the Parrot and Affis and stuff like that. So prosumer means it's a professional level piece of equipment for the consumer market. So when you take these things up here, DJI have probably sold maybe 100,000 around the world, whereas they've probably sold 100,000 Mini 2s in the last couple of days. It's the technology that's gone into those is far advanced. So the software updates you tend to get and the firmware updates you'll get for those are a lot better than these. These are actually free versions out of date, and that's deliberate. And that's basically because I found bugs on the newest updates. They fly fine, but then, for example, with this one, on the newest update, the master controller keeps losing connection to the slave controller. So that's a work issue for me. So that's a bug that we've given to DJI and then we're waiting for them to fix. But with your normal Mavics and Parrots and all that, just always update them. But go back to what I said earlier, when you do that first flight after an update, go to an empty field, go to a safe location. Don't fly it from your back garden. Don't fly it over the monument. Go somewhere safe with it.
Roger Stanford's just come in asking a question about, would you like to say something about flyaways and of GPS drones?
Right. So from my experience, flyaways are normally user error, not necessarily. You will always get the odd one that is a genuine flyaway. I have had one in the past. It actually managed to get past 15 fail-safes to actually fly away. So when you take a flyaway with a DJI drone, it's normally someone's done something wrong to it, because the modern DJI drones, the modern Parrot drones, it's not just that they're relying on GPS, they've got Geo Fencing, they've got all sorts. So classic example I always reference was, I think it was the X Factor about 8 years ago. They had a large hexacopter filming the crowds of people lining up to go in and queue. They'd been rushed by the director to get the shot, and they took off before GPS had locked. They're flying along the crowd, at which point the GPS locks and goes, I'm not supposed to be here, and sent the drone off at a high speed to try and get where it should have been. So the most important thing when you switch any drone on is let it get its GPS lock, follow the instructions on the app, make sure that it's been calibrated if it needs to be calibrated. So again, if you take a DJI drone or Parrot drone, for example, if it's not being calibrated on the compass and it's not properly correctly set, when you push forwards on the stick, it could go left or it could go right because the compass isn't aligned to the drone. So it's important to make sure you follow the instructions. So a lot of the ones that get crashed on Christmas, I'm waiting for it again, Christmas Day, got a drone for Christmas, it flew up over the garden fence. It's probably because they've just got it out of the box in excitement and taken off. Modern drones, most of the DJI ones, won't even let you take off if the compass isn't calibrated. It will literally lock itself and refuse to do anything.
Talk about GPS or not GPS, Chris. Just a thought for something I was contemplating the other day when I was watching something at our AGM, somebody flying indoors. Yeah. Obviously, no GPS signal indoors. What's good to fly indoors? You know, what's actually really good fun? Is it FPV only, or?
It depends entirely on what you enjoy, obviously. I'm just going to grab one because I have it here. The Rise Tello. A lot of people think this is a DJI drone. It's not. It's made by a company called Rise, R-Y-Z-E. The reason a lot of people think it's got DJI manufactured is DJI sell them because they put their software on it. These are £99, I think, roughly, so £100 for the model. For about £130, you can get a combo with a second battery, a charger, and some other bits. And the beauty with these is you actually get about 500 quid's worth of technology inside them. They're semi-funded by Intel, they're semi-funded by DJI, and there's a couple of other companies involved as well. So the processor that's on board, the microchip, is probably worth more than the drone alone. The software on board is worth more than the drone alone. You're getting a lot of value. So these things, Andy's bought one. They have two little vision sensors. I don't know if you can see the two little circles on the bottom. So they'll kind of hold position over any form of contrast. So it acts a bit like an indoor GPS. So the Inspire 1, the Inspire 2, they have vision position sensors. The Mavics have them. Not sure about the Mini 2. I've never really used it. But again, although you've lost GPS indoors, the vision position sensor will work like GPS as long as you're below about 5 meters above the ground. So when you fly some of these drones inside, so again, picking on the Mini 2, you take off and you try and go above 5 meters high, and the app will flash at you. Do you really want to go above 5 meters? Because I'm going to switch the sensor off and you're going to have to fly it yourself.
Oh, I just spotted the CEO of the BMFA saying he's just put one on his Christmas list. So you need commission for that somewhere.
Yeah. The Tellos, you have to fly them with a smartphone. They connect through an app. So when you actually open the app, you've got the joystick as touchpads on the screen. Right. That's the standard way to fly them. Or for another £30, you can buy what looks like a PlayStation Xbox controller, and that connects to your mobile phone through Bluetooth. So you still need the phone, and you put the phone in the bracket on the back. Andy was trying this the other day. You can actually then get a little pair of goggles that you slot your mobile phone into, and you can kind of do indoor FPV with it. So they're a fantastic piece of kit, really. They're designed for the education market, but it doesn't stop grown-ups playing with them.
Absolutely. I think it's quite incredible what you get for your money with those.
With these things, yeah, fantastic. Yeah. That's a Game Senior or Game Sir. They're 30 quid. So 150 quid and you've got everything you need.
I have a birthday coming up. You never know. Right. I can see another statement here from somebody. I can recommend the Mobula 6 for safe and fun indoor flying. So that's another one, just to say that we're not biased to any one company.
No.
Well, before we get arrested.
I went to pick on DJI just because a lot of people know them, but yeah, I mean,
they tend to just work, don't they? The DJI products.
They do. So do the Parrots. So do the Uniques. So do the Autel drones. They're all good. They're all very, very good. It's just quite often when I speak to somebody and I say to them, "Have you tried the Parrot Nappy?" They look at me blankly and they go, "It's very similar to the Mini," and they go, "Oh yeah, it's a good one." Then.
Chris Barlow asks, "Can DJI and similar drones be limited to not travel more than a set distance from the operator, and do they have anti-collision features?"
Okay, so Geo Fencing is available on most camera drones now, most smart drones. I think even your FPV drone has it, doesn't it, Andy? Geo Fencing.
You can certainly set the maximum distance from your takeoff point on that, same as you can on the Mini 2, can't you?
Yeah. So Geo Fencing is basically where you limit the ability for the drone to leave an area. So you can, again, if I pick on DJI, just because I know those apps a lot more, but I know you can do this with the Autel, the Parrot, and various other ones. You can put them in things like beginner mode. Beginner mode will normally limit you to maximum speed, 30 meters of distance, 20 meters of altitude. So you can literally keep it in a very small area. You can then set your own settings in the app. So you can say no more than 120 meters high, no more than 500 meters range. Or if you're flying something like a Mavic Mini, you might want to limit that to 200 meters of range, because trust me, at 200 meters, a DJI Mini is going to be very, very small on the horizon. But again, that's personal preference. So yes, that can be done. There was another aspect to that question, wasn't there, about geofencing?
Collision avoidance, wasn't
collision
it?
Avoidance, yeah.
Certainly the Mini doesn't have, but some of the more expensive, I think the Mavics do, don't they?
Yeah, the Mavic 2, so the original Mavic has collision sensors on the front, but you're welcome to reverse into whatever you like. That was the issue with those drones. The Mavic 2 had it on the front and back, but you could go straight up into stuff. I think the Mavic 3 is the first one that actually has a complete collision avoidance. But I have, like I said, I've not gone completely into the spec of those because they're so expensive. The Cine one is about £4,800. It's Inspire money. It's a very expensive drone. But yeah, so collision sensors depends on what you buy. So some of the Parrot drones have it. I think Autel definitely have collision on some of theirs as well. The Unique drones have collision on some of theirs. So yeah, it's available, just not necessarily on every drone. The other collision avoidance that you have is bumpers.
Chris? I think for things like the Mini 2, where they are very straightforward to fly, colliding into things shouldn't really be an issue if you're flying it sensibly, should it?
No. Again, if you take things like the Mini, all the latest DJIs, you can put it into Cine mode, sport mode, and manual. So you can have it flying at a slow speed, which again limits that sort of runaway speed, as it were, or you can go for sport and have a bit more fun.
Yeah.
Chris, that's been amazing. Thank you very much. And you need a drink. You haven't even had a drink. And on talking about drink, have you had to bar anybody from the wobbly gimbal yet?
No,
Mark. You won't be again, and you'll find. No, it's all very good-natured banter that we have, and I think the last one, it was 2.5 hours before we realised, and we didn't have any sort of programme or anything. We were just chatting away with, there was about 8 of us, I think, wasn't there?
Yeah.
Just a bit of drone talk, a bit of general flying talk, just generally social.
And just general conversation in terms of where they'd been photographing, what they wanted to photograph next and stuff like that.
I mean, that's one of the things we're sort of aiming to do with the sort of British drone flyers side of things, isn't it? Is sort of build more of a community.
Yeah.
Organise events where we can all meet up and, do some picture taking at various places, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And indeed set up sort of regional groups as well. Which we've got the first one up and running already. I'm going to have a shameless plug for my
Yorkshire Drone Flyers.
Yorkshire Drone Flyers, yeah. So anybody who's a BMFA member, BDF member,
flat cap
in Yorkshire, yeah. So you've got to get a flat cap for your drone, obviously. Drones are great for mixing mushy peas, apparently. But so anybody who wants to join the Yorkshire Drone Flyers, click on that link and do so. There's no charge to join. And we'll be looking at setting up various sort of meetings within Yorkshire. Because you don't need to go anywhere else for anywhere gorgeous to photograph, do you? Because everywhere else is not as good.
Well, Andy, we were doing really well up until then. Everybody was saying, thank you, great presentation. All of a sudden, it's now we need it in the West Midlands group. So you can start rivalry now.
They've got to have something to look forward to in the West Midlands, haven't they?
Yeah, we do want to find a few people to start setting up some areas, don't we? So if anybody wants
absolutely. I think if anybody's ideally got some experience and wants to sort of head a group in their particular county, get in touch and we'll get you set up.
You don't have to be quite as nerdy and geeky as me, but it would help.
Nobody's quite as nerdy and geeky as you, though, Chris.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, look, we've got I think we've got a couple of questions here, so let's just end on these two, and then I think we'll all go for a quiet cup of tea or coffee or a beer or something. Robert Stanford again: can BMFA members attend brush drone flyer events and vice versa?
I think one thing actually was one of my last 2 comments. Really, I've got one other comment after this, but this one is a BDF member, a British Drone Flyer member, is a BMFA member. They are part of the same group. So a BMFA member, in our opinion, is a BDF member. You know, we're not trying to separate drones from the BMFA. All we're trying to do with the British Drone Flyers is bring in more. So I get asked a lot. I'm a BMFA member. I've been flying planes. Can I fly my drone as well? Yes, absolutely. Your BMFA insurance already covers you to fly drones. You don't need to be a BDF member as well. You're a BMFA member, crack on, fly your drone, have fun. The British Drone Flyers is set up to attract those people in that aren't in a club. So you take a lot of these people that fly camera drones, they've probably got one, they're going out flying, filming, photographing monuments and taking stuff, whatever. They're not in a club. So it's a different type of member. That's all we're trying to do, is bring in those extra people so that united we can achieve, which is the BMFA motto. So yeah, if there's a BMFA member wants to come to a British Drone Flyer event, wants to join us in the Wobbly Gimbal, yeah, by all means, do come along. We'd be pleased to see you.
Brilliant.
The events, I'm going to say the events are listed on the British Drone Flyers website. So yeah, anybody can sign up to them.
Yeah.
Final point, which I think you've already covered. Is there a Drone Flyers in Derby, Derbyshire? I think the answer is probably not. But if you'd like to set one up, we're willing to help.
We're sort of working on it. We need individuals in each area really to just sort of lead things, but we'll assist obviously, you know, with websites and you know, any assistance to get things up and running. Essentially, it's like any, you know, like a model flying club. It's just a case of, you know, if the group of people want to do it, you do it, and we're here to help you do it.
What we're trying to do essentially is grow the multi-rotor side. You know, it's one of the sort of futures of the hobby and the futures of the BMFA in some respects, because you want to actually bring these people in and bolster the numbers, not make it a them and us. You know, we want to bring everybody together.
Yeah.
I've chucked a couple of links.
Building the community, isn't it? Building the community.
Create the community. Yeah. I've chucked 2 links in the chat, one for a search and rescue from my YouTube channel years back, which shows how you can use a drone. And then one was the music video we shot using this thing from Radiohead.
Wicked.
The last thing I was going to say is if anybody wants to get into FPV drones, the DJI FPV drone is a great stepping stone between a camera drone and FPV, because you get the stability of a camera drone, the ability to use GPS, let go of the sticks if it's going wrong, press a panic button and bring it home. But at the same time, you can step yourself up from beginner to intermediate to full manual aerobatics without crashing, hopefully.
And the quality in the goggles is what sold me on it.
It's HD versus analog.
Yeah,
you're going from
unbelievable.
You're going from that kind of black and white television to 4K overnight. It's a huge step up. Yeah.
Quite scary.
Lenny Allen has just put a comment in. He's put FPV question mark in the chat box.
First person view.
Yeah, first person view. Essentially, you're wearing goggles, or you're flying, looking at a screen, and you're seeing a sort of a pilot's eye view, as if you were sat on top of it.
First person. Yeah.
So this is FPV on steroids right there. So that's a heavy lift FPV drone for cinema filming. So we can carry a 2 kilo cinema camera like a Red Epic or a Red Komodo. When we fly this, we use this little camera on the front, which relays a video signal back through these antennas to the goggles, so I can see what the camera sees, and then we can record from a camera on top. So the kind of the simplified version is that with the GoPro. So there's a camera on the bottom, there's a camera on the top. First person view. If anybody's interested in, there you go. You end up looking like Ant-Man.
Yeah, he's an Ant-Man.
Yeah.
If anybody likes Michael Bay films, the guy who did Transformers, the original one, and stuff like that, he's got a new film coming out called Ambulance, or something about ambulance. It's one of the first commercially made films that's going to have FPV shots in it, where the drone kind of comes down the side of a building vertically, swoops up, and then tracks the ambulance along the road and stuff like that. It's creating shots when it comes to filming, but it's all about creating shots that you can't do by hand, that you don't want to do with superimposing and stuff like that. I watched a film with Gal Gadot, The Rock, and Ryan Reynolds in it. Is it Red? It's something, I can't remember the name.
Yes, I watched that the other day.
It's not red letter,
red
is it?
Something or other, wasn't
Red
it?
something. It's basically, if you're on the Interpol's most wanted, you're on their red list, essentially.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of shots in there that when you look at it on the first glance, you think, oh, that's a really good FPV shot. And then it does something that would be completely impossible for a drone. And you go, oh, that's CGI all along. And it takes me out of the shot. If it can be done for real, it keeps me invested better, personally, anyway.
Yeah, Red Notice, that film.
Red Notice, thank you. That's the one. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, on that note, I think we're losing some of the participants now. We'll just thank everybody for turning up, and Andy and I were going to advise everybody what was happening next week, but we haven't done our homework and we can't, so it's a little bit of a surprise. We will get some adverts out pretty damn quick, and try to let everybody know what we're up to next Tuesday. But at the same time, and we'll have something organised, I hope. That's right, Lee. Yeah, Barry.
Pylon racing.
Pylon racing.
Yeah. Pylon racing.
Yeah. Yes. E2K and C32 pylon racing. And then the week after is control line speed with Dick Hart.
Right. I need the information to get the page set up then as soon as you can.
Yeah.
And then we'll get the message out to everybody.
Yeah, I'll get it over to you later this evening.
Super. Thank you.
Well, thank you everybody. I think we'll stop the recording, Andy.